The ANC's controversial cadre deployment policy has been under the spotlight following the Commission of Inquiry's report stating that a key mechanism of state capture was the strategic positioning of individuals in positions of power through the abuse of public sector appointment and the dismissal processes. Let's get more now on this, and in particular the ANC policy on cadre deployment. We're joined by independent political writer and analyst, Dr. Ebrahim Harvey. Dr. Harvey, thank you very much for your time. I guess as a country, perhaps, are we getting to a point where, as people, it's almost as if we're speaking to ourselves, we're not speaking to the government of the day? Because if the cadre deployment policy is pronounced on by the Commission of Inquiry into state capture as one of the key mechanisms of state capture and therefore ought to be done away with, and the governing party, it appears, at least for now, that they are ignoring that, is there any point in talking more and more about this?
No, they're not ignoring it. To the contrary. If I might say, you got things very wrong. Out of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, because almost every page of that, those reports, you can see clearly how the ANC went to work and used the cadre deployment as an instrument which facilitated, this widespread corruption. But just last week, you mustn't forget, the national framework towards the professionalization of the public service was adopted by Cabinet.
Yeah.
And at the same time, not long ago, Trevor Manuel said, to hell with the cadre deployment, scrap it. And our president himself, just over the past 2 weeks, I think in anticipation of this new legislation, has been speaking the same language very strongly and forcefully. So the entire situation within the ANC, there are lots of people who will be opposed to it because that was their way of getting jobs, and the inroads to corruption and everything else. It was cadre deployment from 1994. Without cadre deployment, let me tell you now, if appointments was based on merit, 10% at most, I can assure you now, even perhaps that is too high, would have made it, ANC people, to those positions, 10% or less.
Yeah.
So now the legislative framework has overtaken that. I think there must have been a fight even and struggle in the Cabinet for the Cabinet to adopt it. And once you've adopted this and you read that framework, it kicks out cadre deployment completely. It's a meritocratic procedure for the appointment of people. And it's across the state, as I stated in my News 24 column, which is why you're interviewing me for today.
Indeed.
Last week.
And that's why I want to pick up on it, because
yes.
What's the word? The skepticism perhaps has to do with the language that is used. Talk to us about why you are much more optimistic this time around. And I say that because politicians, in particular ANC politicians, have been talking about professionalizing the public service for the longest time. So what is it that makes the public, or should make the public, believe that it is going to be implemented finally this time around?
No, you see, this is different now. Don't forget that a couple of years ago, I did a piece of business there. I showed and I cited from the consumer, what's this framework of public servants. It's actually pointed very seriously to cadre deployment. I forget it now. But drawing on that is how you've got this new framework now. It's been coming for long, and I'm sure the reason why it's taken so long to become legislation, there must have been a lot of internal resistance. But it's the Zondo Commission of Inquiry that was the tipping point. After that, Ramaphosa and the ANC, especially people who've been cognizant for long that this cadre deployment, because the Zondo shows clearly and systemically that cadre deployment facilitated corruption and it's linked to capture. So it's changed now. I know you guarded. It's a bit of guarded, positive thing, the way you're looking at this, because of the previous. It's changed now. The new legislation that's come out now just last week towards the professionalization of the public service has changed everything. And the cabinet has adopted it. Just hold on, the cabinet pointed out, it's guarded, so I can understand it, but it's very clear. The cabinet speaks about the adoption of they have to reconsider the efficacy of cadre deployment because of the problems that have occurred. But it's the Zondo Commission that has pushed this whole process now relentlessly forward. It's unstoppable. And that framework that I've referred to a few times is the new framework that will determine appointments.
All right. So, two things then, Dr. Harvey. Because as you correctly point out, this is guarded skepticism. And as I've mentioned earlier, because we have heard this language for the longest time, now you're saying it's firmly in the rule books. It's about to become law. So, implementation is a big problem in this country. You know as well as I do that the plans are plenty, but implementation, the ANC government itself has acknowledged this. So that's point number one as to the enforcement of this. But linked to that, and I can sway your mind in that direction because you also are au fait with the political landscape. Dr. Zamane Soul, who's the leader of the ANC in the Northern Cape and premier there, says, if President Ramaphosa does not win the day come December, the State Capture Commission of Inquiry report will be thrown out the window in 3 months post that conference. So again, I ask you, where is your optimism coming from?
No, it's coming from the new legislative framework I referred to, the national framework towards the professionalization of the public sector. You need to look at it. It's very serious. And a big player in this regard, you need to thank them, the DA. It's the DA drawing on the Zondo Commission of which the Zondo said clearly it's unconstitutional, unlawful. Shortly thereafter, DA went to court to declare cadre deployment. It's a very important development here. The only party who really fought and went to court is the DA. That set the basis. That's the reason why the shift by the ANC, because the ANC knew, drawing from the Zondo Commission, the DA was going to absolutely win that court case. The court case would have to reckon with the fact that Zondo said it's unlawful and unconstitutional. That is the very important political and policy architecture that you must take into account for a newfound optimism. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I'm mindful of what you referred to, the resistance. That's why in the column I spent the last 2 paragraphs saying there's going to be resistance. It's going to take maybe a couple of years even to work itself through, because the bulk of the people, if not all, have cadre appointments. And to get new people in that complies with the new legislation, it's going to take a long process, So this is what I think is the problem. But a massive step forward has been taken with this new legislation. And Ramaphosa speaking out very clearly now that they need to get rid of cadre deployment and have a meritocratic system of employment across the state and public sectors. That is a reason for profound optimism, I must tell you. Yeah. Despite limitations that, there'll be a lot of internal resistance because employment has been based on cadre deployment in the state. They relied on it. And so to get rid of it, you can imagine, I think probably most of the people in government coming from the ANC were not qualified in the first place. They never had the requisite skills. So they're going to have to make way. New advertisements would have to go out, and the state and public sector will have to be, certainly redrafted. Yeah. And will have to apply for jobs again.
Dr. Harvey, I cannot but also be enthused by your optimism, and I don't want to downplay that because perhaps it is a new era. That then leads us to talk about clear timelines. You've gone through the legislation. Are there clear timelines for when this has got to come into effect? And perhaps let me ask you a different angle to this, and that's the element of assassinations, killings. Why do you think every every year, or should we say every period of local government elections, bring with it the political assassinations? Because effectively what we've been told, and I'm lucky because I've been in the field and I've listened to people saying this, that the reason people are killed in that fashion is that there is a scramble for these positions at branch level or at regional level, because people know that once I'm chairperson of a region, I stand a good chance of becoming a mayor. Are we going to not see a ramp up of those assassinations?
It is very likely. Really, it is very likely, because it's easy to talk, as I am now, of the new legislative measures that's emerging now, that's going to alter the playing field completely, and in a healthy way, that I think will stem the state capture and corruption that we've had. But no doubt, I mean, most of the people of the ANC, that often it's their first job as councillors. They've never worked before. They have little skills and qualifications. So when this legislation kicks in, it's possible there might be a big backlash in the townships and amongst the ANC branches and in the public sector by ANC deployees. We don't know what's going to come. But the legislation is crystal clear of its objectives, and it's very promising in that regard. The political resistance that will follow is certainly there, and there is a tendency for violence, as you've seen around elections, and a large reason for the violence was precisely because if you don't get a job as a councillor, what's going to happen to you? Unemployment is at the highest level ever. You can't go to the private sector, so the dependence on jobs through cadre deployment is what is fueling a lot of the violence in the townships. If you get in there, what is happening to you?
So answer me this then, Dr. Harvey. Answer me this. How safe are you as a professional? You are a qualified engineer, let's say. And there you are, coming from, I suppose, the private sector, if you will, and you're a highly trained individual. Are you really going to go and take up a position where you know that someone last month was killed who would have occupied that position, but because they are massively qualified and there was a political appointee that was mooted for that position, are you really going to go and take up that job? I'm simply saying, have you considered that aspect?
Yeah, no, I've not considered that aspect, but I'm able to respond to you. Because, you must remember, I mean, what has happened to the state and government sectors for how many years now? I think many people qualified as avoided employment in the state because of the chaotic situation. There's no doubt about it. But if this leads to, and it will take some time, remember, these things are not going to kick in immediately, and the processes might take a few years. What you're speaking about, that speculation, is down the line. And I'm able to say in advance what exact response and reaction you're going to have. But it may likely increase the violence, We have to see how the electoral conference, this is a key aspect of answering your question. They're going to have to deal with this in Nasrec in December. It will have to come up, certainly. So what comes out of Nasrec and whether they confirm this new legislative measures and what's on the cards, it will have to be discussed then. You've got to look closely at what emerges from Nasrec at the ANC's electoral conference in this regard. There's no way they can ignore it. It's a pillar of policy that's now, on the table.
Dr. Harvey, let's move away then from the cadre deployment policy, and you speak about the Nasrec conference. I've just had a discussion with Dr. Snugi Zigalala, the convener of the Veterans League, and it's very clear, because of the step-aside rule, that if there is anything that sticks to the ongoing investigations or even the panel that's probing Phala, President Ramaphosa, if any of these comes out and says there's a prima facie case, he has to step aside. Give me your crystal ball here. I know you're probably going to say no, but you asked me to speculate. I'm asking you to speculate because there's a very real possibility, and that's why President Mbeki is having sleepless nights about Phala Phala. Is the president likely to be disqualified at this upcoming conference of the ANC? Leave aside his government job right now and his position as leader of the party. I'm talking about how the markets will likely react to the outcome that completely does not have Cyril Ramaphosa as head of the party.
Yes, but what you need to do, and I'd attempt to answer your question as adequately as I could, you've got to start in Parliament.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, the answer is what that panel comes up with and decides. If the panel decides there's a prima facie case, that's not impeachment. That is maybe a recommendation for impeachment. It must go through a parliamentary process. We don't know how the parties, the ANC, what will come out of that. Only once impeachment actually occurs, and there's a process that has to be followed, I'm worried because there's just 6 weeks left for the ANC's conference.
Yeah.
But even, impeachment would mean would change everything. But remember, the step-aside rule only kicks in when formal charges. The Parliament is not a court. You see, as much as lawyers constitute that panel, formal charges will have to be laid against Ramaphosa. Formal charges by the SIU, the police, etc. And only then does the people get confused with the step-aside. It's very crystal clear. No matter what allegations are made, you only step aside and required by the ANC to step aside if you've been charged formally. And you sit with those formal charges in your hand. It's a fait accompli, finished, which has not happened in the case of Ramaphosa. And what will happen following impeachment, if it happens, and it is carried through in Parliament and he can't stop it. What then happens, is a massive problem because we've got 6 weeks left. I think it's the most tumultuous 6 weeks probably in post-apartheid South African history. What's going to happen between now? And remember, by the 17th of November, the parliamentary panel must give the outcome of the deliberations. You see, the 17th of November, it's less than a month before the ANC's electoral conference. We got heavy days ahead of us, honestly.
Wow.
But I'll critical, without which you have to look at what the panel is going to come out with on the 17th of November. Key and critical.
Yeah, that's the date to look forward to then. Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, let me thank you very much for your analysis. Sage advice indeed. We shall see what happens then.